I can't stress the faith practices of the Church of the Brethren in Nigeria, where they will sing and they will dance and they will do their offerings to the Lord, and they will organize into faith rituals that are communal.
The determination, resiliency, and faith of the Nigerian Brethren families is courageous and inspiring. Even in the midst of continued violence and bombing by the extremist group Boko Haram, families from Tlizia, Yanawa, Nigeria, and their neighbors have started the long journey to recovery and return of self-sufficiency. In the last several years, nearly 70% of the EYN church buildings have been burned or abandoned, totaling over 1,600 church buildings. More than 11,000 EYN members have been killed, and thousands have been kidnapped, including the Chibok girls, and hundreds of thousands are still displaced. Even with improved securities, in the second half of 2015, millions of both Christian and Muslim families have been impacted and terrorized by this crisis. Hello, I'm Brent Carlson. Welcome to Brethren Voices. Today we have a very special guest who has returned recently from Nigeria and is on a mission herself of producing a pictorial book of survivors' personal stories from the EYN Church of Nigeria. Carol Mason, it's an honor to have you with us on Brethren Voices.
Thank you, Brent.
Welcome.
Yeah, thank you.
Just a few days prior to this taping, the Boko Haram attacked a community in the eastern part of Nigeria, killing many people with very sophisticated weapons. Many have had to flee their homes, and the crisis continues. Carol, you wear many hats. I'd like to talk to you about all of them, but today we're going to talk about your experience in Nigeria. I know it's a place that's part of your heart. Mm-hmm. Can you tell us about the history of the Brethren Church in Nigeria and your part of that history and why you went recently back to Nigeria?
Church of the Brethren has been out in Nigeria for 90 years, almost 100 years, in terms of the first missionaries being sent out by horseback to bring evangelism to this northeastern part of Nigeria. And it was a Muslim government at that time that kind of sent our guys to Savannah grassland region that had nothing there.
Which is really remote.
Which is really remote, and that's the place where the church has grown organically since then. So really, when you're talking, if you think back that we had no church there at all, and today that we have this, 176,000 church members in displaced persons camps, we just spanned a whole thing and then kind of wiped out a whole thing. So it's an amazing growth. I think the key thing for the Church of the Brethren is that they always did hospitals, schools, and sort of allowing the church to grow up in its natural rising up from the people themselves. It wasn't like a really imposed kind of a church. It's an organic kind of a church. And grassroots and with the community service of hospitals and schools to everyone in the whole community. So it's always been a very community church. And it just expanded from there. And that's the same model we see happening all over in our global missions.
Are there Muslim families in that
Oh,
area?
sure. So okay. Villages are very mixed. Whoever is living there side by side. Even when we were there, we came at the end of kind of a shift in mission. Very interesting shift. Like you have sort of lifetime missionaries. I mean, Owen Shankster, who was a predecessor for us and overlapped with us a little bit in 1983, He went out as a 24-year-old pastor and spent his entire life there and was just retiring when we came in the 80s. So in the 50s, you had like your heyday of missionary work in Nigeria, where there were hundreds of missionaries and all teachers and doctors and hospital workers, as well as evangelists and pastors and trainers, and cult Bible college. Things began to, higher education, things began to form from that big drive of missionary influx. And now ours, in 1983, my husband and I, Ralph and I, were assigned there following Showalters. Marion and Doris Showalter had been there 30 years, and they were just retiring. And they had been placed in Garkita. He was a mechanic and able to fix all things. My husband Ralph was the same, able to kind of fix all things. He grew up on the mission field in India. You need that kind of jack of all trades to come in and keep radios going and vehicles going and be able to build. Owen Schenkster dug 3,000 wells, to be able to dig wells.
And you have to maintain them.
You have to maintain this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So we came in right at that end of, there are hardly any missionaries still out there, because Nigerians are all the pastors, and Nigerians are all the school teachers, and Nigerians are, the hospital workers and everything.
There's actually more Nigerian Church of Brethren members in Nigeria than in the United States.
Than in the United States. That's right. It's just a fast-growing church, and it again, the cup of cold water. I mean, it just grew naturally. So
let me ask, because when we talk about schools and hospitals, were those open to Muslim families? And
yeah, even when they're under our church started, they're called day schools. In 83, they're still kind of under missionary, and the missionary schools had a high reputation. Early graduates became pilots and constitutional writers and things like this. I mean, high reputation. But we arrive in 83, a couple of significant things. 83, we arrive, and by 85, all the programs are given over to the Nigerian government. So you've got Nigerian history, their independence from the Brits in 1960, their Freedom of Education Act by 1974, so there's more kids coming to all the schools, and the mission schools are right out in the forefront of that. But by 85, that's all under the government. So like the Church of the Brethren Leprosarium by Garkita becomes under the Department of Health and becomes a skin hospital for them, and leprosy is about wiped out. The Garkita Hospital, which had been run by missionaries, is then run by Nigerian-trained doctors and an influx of some South India doctors and Pakistani doctors, and then it becomes under the government of Nigeria. So it's a government hospital. The schools become government day schools. And then in our 10 years there, by the time we're leaving in 95, Church of the Brethren headquarters in Kwarhi is again beginning to start to build their own schools on their headquarters compound, saying, wow, our children aren't receiving the same education in the government schools. Let's kind of start it. And that's when it's kind of for pastors' children and for just Christians. It's more inside a Christian compound. So it shifts a little bit differently.
So what took you back to Nigeria?
Well, this time, yeah, it's like we finished our mission task by 95 and came home, and that's a whole nother story. But so I really came home, and then in 2001, the Pacific Northwest District I realized, here I am home in the Pacific North District, they had never been on a work camp to Nigeria. And this is when EYN is expanding and building, and so I took a nice work camp there to go there, and also my sons to kind of go back as an adult. They'd
been there.
They had been there as children, but to go back and kind of get that perspective as grown-ups and work on that work camp and be part of this whole thing. So that was wonderful in 2001. And also, work camp in 2005, like to lead those kinds of things. But I really haven't been there since 2005. 2001, the second thing I did was a 10-year review of the school that we started in 91. That was also the evaluation of how's it going on. So I got to do that part. 2005 work camp, and then this assignment, I'm on what's called the Global Mission Advisory Council. But from that group, Jay Whitmire, who runs the Global Mission Desk, takes me aside and says, listen, in 50 years, we're going to look back and say this is the biggest thing that happened to our church. This shocking 11,000 dead, the wall of healing that we paraded around the annual conference 2 years ago, the EYN Appreciation Choir tour coming, the numbers of dead, and these villages that are decimated, and 1,600 churches completely burned, 43 out of 50 church districts in Nigeria closed. The church headquarters in exile, they moved up to a safer place by the capital city rather than their eastern north, their highly volatile location. So together with Brethren Press, I had a conference call with Jay Whitmire, Wendy McFadden, and myself to create what we came up with is the idea of like a photograph and the personal story, photograph and personal story of actual survivors. So this time, they asked me just to go back and to just do interviews in the internally displaced persons camps. So not to really travel around Nigeria except for just the camps and interview people that survived that had a story to share. And we were hoping for about 50 stories. We had a really nice form for people to sign that we could release their story, release their photo, and use it in this book. And everyone did sign. However, they also said, please don't get a list going too soon. We don't want our names out there because we don't want to be targeted. So it's still a dangerous time right now. So I can't say when this book might come out. Mm-hmm. However, they wanted me to get out there quickly to gather the stories before they're kind of forgotten. And I feel like I arrived at an opportune time where those I interviewed, number one, had received enough trauma and healing training, which was kind of our second step in the camps after the disaster relief of food distribution, water, and safety, then to give them trauma healing to be able to gain more resilience. So I found very resilient camps and those that were just bursting with their own creativity coming out of that practice of faith that kept them through all this. So I feel for my personality and also for my trauma level of like hope, I was gifted with the perfect time to arrive to receive these stories when someone could be healthy enough to relate them. Even maybe tears are coming down their face, but they want to share their story and be able to articulate that. And again, here's our progress with the Nigeria crisis is disaster relief is first. Get some land, get them something safe, tents, water, food distribution, and then we began kind of learning tours or please just come and stand with the people to show that we are caring. And then 3, can we start work camps? And they're starting work camps every month to start the rebuildings, to say, when it's safe to go back, we're with you to rebuild your church. When it's safe to go back, headquarters can move back from Jos back to Kwarhi. And I arrived at the time when those in the camp that I interviewed, instead of just arriving there, they had now been there 3 years, and this was their turning point where they go, we can't go home. What happens if we live here? Mm-hmm. And that's when this creativity just took off that said, we get to make this a new little place to live. It's not our old village. We can take what's useful there and apply it to our new thing, and that's what I got to witness. So, yeah, it's an amazing thing.
Carol, let's take a short break for a message. Yeah. The Church of the Brethren continues to respond to the recovery effort of the EYN Brethren. A large-scale, holistic program continues providing emergency relief and early recovery, even as programming is transitioning to long-term recovery activities in some communities with improved security. By caring for the whole person and the community, funds provided to the Nigerian Crisis Fund are assisting to provide materials for their basic needs, spiritual care, trauma healing, education, agriculture, and community development. They are all key parts of this response. And of course, the need continues for the EYN Brethren who continue to have faith, hope, and perseverance in these times of attempting disaster recovery while violence continues. Even a little help will mean so much. We're so privileged to have Carol Mason with us. Thanks again for taking the time to be with us on Brethren Voices.
It's a pleasure to be here because it's an important story to get out there.
Yeah. So tell us about some of the stories, because I'm just guessing that the stories are filled with terror and hopelessness.
They are horrible.
And then somehow
there's miracles.
Miracles.
Every story has an absolute miracle feel about it. And every story has so much horror that I myself went through trauma healing when I got home, just from absorbing stories.
I'm glad you knew enough to ask for that.
You have to, or you can't function. It's like you're just, like those who had really received trauma healing, this is where I'm saying this cooperation and this creativity and this, I can't stress the faith practices of the Church of the Brethren in Nigeria, where they will sing and they will dance and they will do their offerings to the Lord and they will organize into faith rituals that are communal. When they have a worship, traditionally they'll dance their offering to the altar. Well, the pastor realized very quickly in this camp that we had traditional Lhasa dances, traditional Margi dances, traditional all kinds. And so instead of just having your village traditional dance to the altar, we now had multiple kinds of dances and multiple kinds of songs. And he began by kind of honoring those, saying, come in this way if you're in the Margi tribe, follow your Margi dancer, show us a Lhasa dance, show us a Chibok dance, show us, and then over these 3 years, it's become, who wants to dance for peace? And this one became the peace offering. Shall we have a Lhasa leader? Shall we have a Margi leader? And everyone's learned each other's dances, so that now they're dancing for peace, or they're dancing for love, or they're dancing the joy offering, and they're all mixed tribes and mixed mother tongues, and they've learned each other's dances, so whoever's leading, they'll all follow. So it's that kind of growth and creativity and witness and coming. It's an interfaith camp, so all the Muslims that fled too are highly welcome. Boko Haram kids, soldiers who just, were able to escape from their abduction, and of course they're without their weapons, but they're just starving. If they find their way, they're welcome in the camp. Education is for everyone. Like, if, say you have the headmaster from a school, but he's lost his government job and here he is displaced and he's in the camp, but he finds that there's women's literacy is needed, he'll do that. And they've intentionally chosen like Montessori training for the preschoolers to start interfaith and a non-violent, non-competitive, cooperative way of learning and thinking for yourself. So it's not kind of a do what you've been told kind of. It's that education that awakens their own natural intelligences and allows them to be natural leaders. Marvelous, so that'll be like the first school.
Didn't we also send some people to teach trauma healing for children?
Oh yeah, we have sent that. Mennonites have sent that, and they have done trainers. We're even kind of joining with the THARS, which is a trauma healing in Burundi, because they have that training, and also that AVP, that nonviolence training. So we're having cross-fertilization. But what I saw were displaced persons who'd been trained as trainers holding the workshops. And in fact, one of the most loving actions I saw was when I was being led by two people from one camp to another camp by motorcycle. They're kind of close together, but not really walking distance. This camp that had been kind of trained and had moved through and had begun these cooperative and creative things, when they went over, they saw the flat affect and the listlessness and the like, you gave me this borehole, but now I ran out of fuel. I can't think what to do next. Kind of, you've given me my distribution, but when you don't give it to me, I can't think what to do. Like when my food ran out, nobody thought of cooperative farms. Like they could tell the trauma was so intense here that they, that day, organized trainings.
It's hard when we're sitting here, it's hard to understand.
Very hard to imagine.
The trauma leads to paralysis.
Trauma leads to the numbness and paralysis.
And you can't think about what to do because you're so
and
overwhelmed.
I can totally witness that when I got back home. First you go, oh well, maybe it's jet lag. Then you go, this is called trauma. I can't think what to get up and do today. I'm overwhelmed by everything.
So we were talking about the photographs and the stories you heard and the displaced persons camps that you went to. Can you just tell us a couple, maybe just a brief beginning of some of the stories?
Sure. So as I said, I had this 1 month time to gather what we hoped for about 50 interviews, and people were hungry to tell their story. So I just recorded and wrote as fast as I possibly could, and I came home with over 300 stories. And
these are all survivors.
These are all survivors
of
in camps.
In camp.
These are in the Brethren camps that came from the disaster relief, which has gone into this continuing Nigeria crisis, which helps them get this resiliency and self-sufficiency in where they're living.
And these are camps where we're making a contribution.
This is totally done by our contribution.
Okay.
They would not exist without our contribution. Yeah.
Okay.
And in fact, there's no other place for these people to go. So, but the contributions are so wisely handled by the people that it's immediately done cooperatively, and it's also interfaith. So, like, you'll have a chairman of the camp might be Christian, and the imam is the vice chairman, and both of them are, young men who are barely 30 who have survived.
But how big are these camps?
All right. Well, the camps vary. Like one camp might have about 200 families, so that'd be about 1,000 people, and another camp might be a little smaller than that, like maybe 100, half the size, and the United Nations camp is hundreds of thousands. But what we found for this kind of resiliency is if our camps are roughly about 1,000 people, or about 200 families, 200 to 300 families, rather than tens of thousands of people.
I was going to say that makes sense because 1,000, 500,000 people can figure out how to organize themselves.
They have to organize themselves.
And 10,000 is overwhelmed.
That's right. So 10,000, you can imagine people sitting in lines and receiving their daily handout kind of things, and the distributions all coming from the West, and kind of just, you get and you're happy with whatever you have. In the camp of about 200 families, where the chairman and vice chairman know each family personally, and for sure, the distribution is coming from it's just like so biblical, like you give to the churches in Jerusalem, like the capital city churches, like the wealthier churches that are doing fine are doing the distributions to the camps. I watched one distribution day where all of the stuff arrived. You know exactly how we gather up food and clothing and rice bags and whatever you can give to the camp. The chairman and vice chairman and their team of workers, camp coordinator, different workers, start at 8 in the morning sorting through everything, and I have pictures of this in my slides too, of where it's all a big pile of things, and then where they make an individual pile for each family member that's perfectly tailored to that family. So the chairman and vice chairman will know their family so well that if someone donated a 3rd grade primary reader, they know which family has a child whose schooling stopped in 3rd grade and they need that reader to continue their own little education. And this pile might have this man-sized pair of shoes because there's a dad there, and this one won't have any men's anything because, well, there's all the widows and all the orphans, and they're all cared for and have their little individual pile. And I stayed with it all day, and by 4 o'clock in the afternoon, all of the families come and receive their offering in such a sacred manner. It's as beautiful as at NYC when we did the reverse offering, and they praise God for everything, and every other family cheers them as they go to the back of the line. They all wait for each other, and it's such a brand new sacred ritual that I don't even know how to describe it. I just have these few photographs and try to give you a few words about it, but that's the image.
It's hard. I can imagine it. It's hard to imagine, but it's also bringing tears to my eyes.
I cried. You can't help it. You just cry. And it's joy and sadness and miracle and everything mixed. And that's what happened as I listened to stories. So you'd listen to a story where, a mother, her last image is waving to her husband as he goes off to work. And then she finds he's dead, all her sons in school, everybody's dead on the same day except this mother and her littlest girl. And she has to go travel and find where the bodies are, and then try to help her get them buried, and how she has the resiliency to go on and not just crumble after that, but how the whole church surrounds them and cares for them and sees her through that time. And I know this so personally from when my husband was killed in Nigeria. The whole Church of Nigeria, and I made a witness some annual conference, you can look it up, of where they said, you're only as strong as our weakest member, so we'll stay with you until you have that strength again. You will go crazy without us, and me, I've got that American bubble around me. I mean, they're sleeping right with me. All the men are camped on the ground. The women are all in the house right with me to keep me from going insane with grief, and that's how they surrounded this woman. They just stayed with her until she was able and strong enough to join into her church, her sister's fellowship, and be at and her little girl is doing well, and she is doing well. And just hearing her story. And that's not even a horrific story because the death happened out of her sight. The horrific ones are the children who had to witness that killing inside the family home. And not only was the father shot and the male older brothers shot, I can't even say it. I mean, they had to chop them up and then make them watch all this, see. And then, So every story has this amazing horror. And then has this woman and these children going, but where there is life, there is hope. And God has saved us here. And the connections of the camp, the EYN officials and the EYN workers that found her in that village, the village church pastor leader, everybody connecting to get her to this camp to be able to be surrounded and cared for in this community. And she's thriving and the children are thriving and being able to go to school. It's phenomenal that they could overcome that kind of trauma. But it's that loving care of the Christian witness of being with you.
I hate to draw this to a close. I want to thank you so much for being with us on Brethren and Voices.
Thanks for the opportunity.
It's a continuing story.
It is a continuing story.
And I'm hoping we can continue to tell it. Thank you for sharing a little bit of your story, your mission, and your project with us today.
Thank you.
The support of the Nigerian Brethren continues to be an urgent need. To assist, check out the Brethren website at www.brethren.org/Nigeria Crisis Fund to make a contribution. And Carol, thanks again for being with us on Brethren Voices.
Thanks for the privilege,
For Brethren Voices, this is Brent Carlson.
And Carol Mason.
Wishing you peace.